Hey everybody, today is Monday, May 1st, 2023. Coming up on the show today, from the Peacock original series Poker Face, editor Glenn Garland.
Rian is really great at giving very clear, specific notes. So right when he came in, it was very clear to us, this is where we're going.
Editor Paul Swain.
I was a bit nervous, but he was lovely. He was such a nice guy, really welcoming. We had a chat. Turns out his brother was a drummer for Billy Idol, which was really cool. I'm a drummer, and I was like, hey, this is cool.
Editor Shahid Qaasim.
I will say this, that I also do swing dancing as a hobby. My colleagues know this about me.
And editor Bob Ducsay.
Brad, have you actually watched the show?
Yes, Bob, I watched the show, and you will hear all about it on this edition of The Rough Cut. Well, hello there, my friends. Welcome back to The Rough Cut. Always a pleasure to have you here. Got an action-packed episode for you today. Yes, I said action-packed. We have four talented and fun editors to talk to. Last week we had Christy Shimmick on to talk about her new mystery movie, Invitation to a Murder. Well, we're keeping the mystery theme going this week, this time with a TV series, Rian Johnson's Poker Face, which stars and is exec produced by Natasha Lyonne, who also had writing and directing duties at certain points of the season. So that's Natasha and Rian. What about the editors? That's what you're here for. I know that. Well, let's start with Bob Ducsay. He is Rian's most frequent collaborator in the cutting room. Together, they've done such films as The Last Jedi, Knives Out, and, of course, Glass Onion. But you already knew this because you've heard all of the Rough Cut episodes on those movies. Well, thank you. But joining Rian for the first time here on Poker Face are editors Glenn Garland, Paul Swain, and Shahid Qaasim, all of whom have an impressive body of work to their names. Glenn's done shows like Preacher and The Vampire Diaries, and movies like the Halloween and Halloween 2 reboots, all heavy stuff. But Poker Face has a lot of comedy to it. Where's that coming from? Well, Paul Swain, he did a show called Brockmire, among others. Very funny show. And Shahid Qaasim put in many, many hours in the cutting rooms of a little show called Modern Family, which had a chuckle or two in it throughout its impressive run. So you've got a really talented, really well-rounded editing crew on hand for Poker Face, which has a delightful blend of comedy and drama. As far as the format of the show, it's an episodic procedural kind of thing, but in a throwback style reminiscent of 70s shows like Columbo or The Rockford Files. It's pretty cool. Natasha Lyonne plays a woman named Charlie Cale, and Charlie has an innate ability to tell when anyone is lying. The series starts off with her working as a cocktail waitress at a casino, and then through a series of circumstances that take place in that episode, by the end she's on the run from the casino boss who wants to kill her. The subsequent episodes of the show find Charlie in a new place for each one, because, she's on the road, she's on the run. But the hook is that each episode starts without her in the first act. So we, as viewers, we're in a new place, meeting new people. Most likely one of them kills one of the others. And then in the second act, Charlie is back. But now we're seeing it from a different perspective of how she was actually around and involved during that first act. If you haven't seen the show, you'll get the idea pretty quickly. And you should see the show, it's a lot of fun. And so are the editors. Therefore, I should get on with our interview. But first, a short tribute to some of the nice people who helped to bring you this podcast with the Poker Face Post team. Now, when you're pouring your heart and soul into your next film or TV show, you're going to need more than lady luck on your side to succeed. You need the deck stacked in your favor. And that starts with making sure your project sounds great. Well, if you want a sonic ace up your sleeve, you need to visit our friends and sponsor Extreme Music. They've been dealing out the best in production audio for over 25 years. Audio tracks all lovingly handcrafted by the most talented musicians, composers, and producers in the business. And those tracks are available to you in different links and easily accessible by doing simple keyword searches on their website. What kind of simple keywords, you wonder? Well, stuff like lyrics, tempo, genre, composer, and more. You can even slide Extreme Music a reference track so they can go find you ones just like it. And when it comes to the licensing, do not worry. You can easily handle that right there on their website or with a real person talking to you from an office nearest to you. Or maybe they're working from home, who knows? It's a whole new world. Everything's changing. But the one constant you can count on is that when you want your next project to sound its very best, you go see our pals at Extreme Music. Okay, so many people to meet today. From Poker Face, here are editors Glenn Garland, Bob Ducsay, Shahid Qaasim, and Paul Swain. Who's buzzing? Well, that's okay. Amateurs.
You know, the strangest part about what Paul's doing is he's making the editing even harder for you here, Matt.
Thanks, Paul. All right, where to begin on a show like this? Well, I think Bob, since you are the Ryan Whisperer, as I like to call you.
I got to tell you, I don't know that he would appreciate that, but okay.
Okay, well, his feelings aside, let's start with the other guys, because I don't believe that the three of you have any prior experience with Ryan.
Correct.
But Glenn, I thought you would start us off by explaining how you became attached to this project and what about it you found so attractive.
Yeah, I've known Ron Bergman for many years, who is Rian Johnson's producing partner. And he told me about this project. And when he described that it would be both Ryan and Natasha Lyonne in this murder mystery where she was on the run and each episode was in a different location, I was just like, oh my God, I got to be a part of this. This sounds amazing. And so then I heard that Bob was going to be cutting the pilot, and I was just like, okay, this is fantastic. I've known Bob for many years, and it just seemed like a dream team, and I really wanted to be a part of it.
Well, that all makes sense to me. It is a dream team. So let's go to the next member of the dream team. Paul, tell us about how you got on the gig and what you thought of the project.
Well, I first heard about the gig through my agent. I was working on another show at the time, and the phone rings, and my agent, Anne Murtha, called me up and said, "Hey, are you sitting down?" I was like, "Yeah, of course." And she goes, "Hey, how would you like to have an interview with Ron Bergman and potentially Rian Johnson?" And I was like, yeah, it sounds great. And I have to admit, their names weren't over familiar to me at that point. So she told me about the show, and I thought, well, that sounds fantastic. And while we were chatting, I did a quick Google search, and then I almost fell off my chair when I realized the level of kudos for these two incredible guys. And I said to her, look, this is super exciting. The dramedy element of it is really up my alley. The cast with Natasha, I've seen her in a few things, and I thought she was wonderful. So yeah, she said, look, I'll put you forward and we'll see what happens. And she did say it's going to be a 3-stage interview process. So the first stage was to meet Cameron, who was the post supervisor, and we did a Zoom with him, and he was lovely, and we got on great. And he said, okay, congrats, you're going to the next stage. And then it was an in-person interview with Ron Bergman at T Street in Studio City. And I was a bit nervous, but he was lovely. He was such a nice guy, really welcoming, made you feel really at ease straight away. We had a chat. Turns out his brother was a drummer for Billy Idol, which is really cool. I'm a drummer. And I was like, hey, this is cool. Chat. And then after about 25 minutes, he said, right, I'm going to put you forward to meet Ryan. I was like, wow, this is incredible. And then Ryan and I did a Zoom interview. And again, immediately, he just put me at ease. He was funny. He was engaging. He wasn't intimidating. He was very welcoming and generous. And we had a good chat. And then we had to wait until you finally get that call where they say, right, you're on the show. And I couldn't have been happier. It was fantastic. The opportunity to meet and work with this caliber of people is a dream. And then to work with, Glenn and Shahid and Bob was just the icing on top.
Well, I'm going to assume, Paul, that you were the only one that had a 3-stage interview, but who knows?
Maybe, but I didn't know anyone in this town. I'm a newbie in this town, so I don't have the privilege of knowing anyone. So I had to work a little bit harder.
You got to start somewhere, Paul. It's totally fine.
Yeah, I heard that Bob Ducsay had to talk to Cameron, and then That's right. He had to go through the 3-stage. He had a 4-stage.
Yeah, Ryan wasn't quite sure about him.
Rom and Ryan are sticklers for procedure, and it doesn't matter how long you've known them. That's correct.
Oh, there you go. Well, so last and certainly not least, my old friend from Modern Family, Shahid. Let's get your story on this one.
Well, my story is very similar to Glenn and Paul, so I don't know how much more I'm going to be able to offer in terms of the process, but I will say this, that I also do swing dancing as a hobby. My colleagues know this about me, and I had an event prior to the meeting with Rom over at T Street And I remember the event kind of went quite late, and, I was very excited for the job, and I really wanted to do the show because I just find Rian Johnson to be such a powerful filmmaker, and I love Knives Out and the craftsmanship that he does in his work. So I do remember that I was, I wasn't up too late because I, got to bed early, but I wanted to make sure I was up for this interview. So I drank a ton of coffee before this meeting coming up here. And it was my first time meeting Ram. And Ram is kind of, in my opinion, at least, kind of a low energy person in a sense. I'm more of like an up person, and Ram's kind of has like a mellow kind of vibe to him. At least he was in the meeting. And I remember I was so fired up at the beginning of this meeting, and almost immediately kind of saw energetically that we were kind of sitting in very different planes. We were dancing very different songs. And I remember kind of telling myself throughout the meeting, being like, all right, Shahid, calm down, calm down. Because I can kind of be an energetic person when I want to be. And then, Shahid and 2 cups of coffee, all fired up, it can be a little bit of a disaster. So, but, nevertheless, it sounds like the interview was successful, obviously. And, we ended up on the show together.
Well, speaking of energetic when he wants to be, Bob, obviously you know Rian pretty well. In fact, you've had plenty of experience doing mysteries with him. When did he approach you with Poker Face? How did he present it to you? Because I think this whole concept of it being a reminiscent structurally and stylistically of 70s and 80s detective procedural shows is really fascinating. So tell me about your talks with Rian on Poker Face.
Well, the thing I would say about, Rob and Rian to start is, and I was making a joke before about procedure and everything, but they're such tight planners of things from a logistical standpoint that it must have been, I don't know, a good 2 years before it actually happened that Ram said, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to make the Knives Out sequel. And at some point during that process, we're going to stand down and we're going to start this television show that Rian is doing with Natasha. And it ended up laying out, almost, exactly as he said, a good, 2 years before it actually happened. So the guys had it really figured out. So it was really, a long period of time that, that I knew that we were going to be doing this. And but interestingly enough, we were so busy with Glass Onion. It wasn't until deep in that process that I even read the pilot, and the sort of the machine on Poker Face was getting started in the background. So it was extremely organic, and it took place over a long period of time. And we talked a lot about the vibe of the show and the things that really kind of make the show so interesting, and also in a way kind of revolutionary because it goes back to a completely different time in television, completely intended, of course. To me, that was one of the most exciting things about it. And then when I read the pilot, I was like, oh yeah, definitely, this is going to be terrific. I was very, very excited to be able to be involved in it because I thought a great deal of fun, and Charlie Cale is such a funny and kind and warm character, and the end result, I think, generally speaking, really bore that out.
So once the concept of the show is set up in that pilot, which is the main character, Charlie Cale, is we'll just say she's on the run from a crooked casino boss that she pissed off. After that, each episode basically functions as a standalone mystery where we know who the killer or killers are, and then Charlie has to figure out how to catch them, which is why they call it a howcatchem. Glenn, considering that there is little to no crossover between those episodes, I'd say like 2 through 9, were you each editing on your own without really interacting with one another, or were you able to check in with each other or take a look at each other's cuts?
Well, Paul and Shahid and I were all editing at the same facility. So we were actually able to talk, and we formed a bond very quickly. Bob, because he was cutting the Glass Onion, was over at T Street. So we were able to go over there and have lunch with him and things like that. But we were not able to see the pilot and episode 9 for a while. And so we were sort of trying to figure out the tone a little bit, because the tone does shift from episode to episode depending on who the characters that Charlie Cale runs into are. So I know that Shahid and Paul and I would sort of go, well, can you take a look at this? Because when I saw your scene, it seemed much more dramatic, or this scene seemed more heightened. And when Rian came in to start working with us, it became very clear that each episode was to function a little bit on its own, almost like a movie of the week. And so it became very clear the key was that Charlie anchors everything and not to worry about the tone shifting as much as Charlie keeping everything on track. And so that's how we were able to figure things out. But Rian is really great at giving very clear, specific notes. So right when he came in, it was very clear to us, okay, this is where we're going. And I think that, I don't want to speak for Paul and Shahid, but I think the key was just, it was so well shot and so well directed. Just lean into what's special about each episode.
Mm-hmm.
You edited independently. Well, the three of you worked in the same facility, removed from Bob. But episode 2, Glenn, you and Bob co-edited that one. How did that work where Bob is sort of, or you didn't? Bob shaking his head.
No.
We didn't co-edit that.
You're not both credited on episode 2?
I think that IMDb has a mistake, and it says that Bob cut that, but I cut that, and Bob cut 1 and 9.
I have to talk to my agent. I mean, she's got to stop doing this kind of thing. I assure you, I was completely uninvolved with that episode.
I take you at face value, Bob. You had nothing to do with that episode.
I didn't mean it like that. It's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic episode. That's not what I mean. I just mean let's not take anything away from the artist who did it.
I would never do that.
Yeah, no. Bob wasn't involved in that one. But Bob is brilliant, so I would love.
Oh, please. By the way, I want to mention something that Glenn alluded to. Is it was a very unusual situation because of the fact that we were making Glass Onion. You know, I was in my Glass Onion cutting room, which was not too far from where the guys were, but still not like right next door. And I think getting the show started was probably a little bit more difficult than usual because we weren't all together. But I'll say that, you know, we developed a great sense of camaraderie, even though we weren't in the room together very often. Anyway, they're just incredibly great and talented guys. And so it was a lot of fun, but I think it was a little bit difficult to get started because we weren't all together.
And Matt, and this is Shahid speaking.
Yeah, I can see you.
He's doing this for radio. Come on.
I thought we're doing radio here. One of the things I think I find to be special about the show and what's so captivating about the show is each one of these episodes are treated as if it's their own little movies. So tonally, it does have a little bit of a range. I know when you work on these TV shows, oftentimes your wheelhouse of what you can do creatively sometimes is limited based on the show that you're working on, because there's certain things that producers do, certain tastes that producers have or do not like. And I think Ryan's such a powerful filmmaker that he really allowed us as editors to kind of also put some of ourselves into each one of the cuts. And, you know, I think he appreciates that level of creativity. And so to go back to your earlier question about, you know, how do we kind of figure out the tone? Each editor figures out the tone. You know, Bob cut the first episode, the pilot, and then episode 9. They were working on those 2 episodes first. And the first episode that we were able to watch was episode 9. And for those who have seen the show, that's probably the darkest episode of the entire series. And that was the one that we had seen. And I was currently at that time working on a show that starred Little Rel, who's a fantastic comedian. So I remember after watching episode 9, I did have a moment where I was like, oh, I am not tonally in the same place as what they are doing. But, you know, come to find throughout the process, all of this was orchestrated that we would be cutting these almost independent 1-hour crime movies, each one of us.
Another thing about the show that's really unique is that in Act 1 for each episode, or after the pilot, we're in a whole new world. We're meeting new people, new casts. You don't even see the main character until the second act. And so that would seem to me that there's a lot of careful thought and consideration that you have to put into this Act 1 to like really hook the audience, because it's without Charlie and it's without the theme music that I'm used to associated with Charlie. So, Paul, maybe you want to tell me a little bit about the challenge of getting that Act 1 right in each episode so that the audience is bought in and sticks with it until Charlie finally gets there.
Sure. This is Paul speaking. Just for the radio listeners. Yeah, look, we were very fortunate that the scripts were so well written. You know, the characters were there, the dialogue was there. For me, one of the crucial things was to get the audience to have some kind of emotion towards those characters that potentially were going to die quite quickly. So we had like 15 minutes to 17 minutes, depending on which episode it was, to create such wonderful characters and have some kind of empathy from the audience or whatever. So sharing the screen time between those characters was a bit of a challenge. You know, how much we're going to show this person, or this person, knowing that that person's going to get it very soon. But on the back of that, it was so tightly written. You know, for me, it was just, we just lay it down. We go through the performance. We make sure that the character was consistent for each one in terms of their performance. And look, you know, for my episode, one of my episodes, Exit Stage Death with Ellen Barkin, I mean, she's wonderful. And you know, there was a couple of ways I could have gone with her. You know, she could have come across pretty harsh and quite aggressive, and the other way was slightly softer. And I think I found a nice balance where she was still pretty up there and a little bit confrontational, but I don't know, as you went on through the show, I think you warmed to her, you had some feelings for her, and you felt what she was going through. And with Tim Meadows, he's such a lovely guy. He didn't need too much work, really. The one thing that I did have, which was a little bit challenging, I believe both actors were not hired for the show until like a day or 2 days before production. So they had to learn their lines very, very quickly. And maybe day one, you know, they were still trying to get their head around the characters. So my first day of dailies, you know, you definitely saw that they were finding their feet, finding the character. And so to grab the best performances for that opening scene was a little bit tricky, but as the days went on, it definitely got easier as they found their feet. But the other thing that I really enjoyed about that first act was that, you know, as it's revealed later, when you realize Charlie was around at the time that certain things were said, or you hear a certain thing, it's really interesting to go in Act 2, so that noise that I saw in Act 1, that was Charlie. So in my episode, there was a moment where Ellen's character was just about to do a monologue on stage, and she was interrupted by an ice bucket, ice being poured into the thing, and she reacted. And at the time, we don't know who the hell did that. And then it's revealed later that Charlie comes in, empties the ice bucket. So all of that was setting that up and make sure that those little moments were clear in the first act, but not too obvious, because we wanted to have a little bit of a surprise later on in Act 2.
So for all you showrunners listening out there, if you want your murderers to be more approachable, hire Paul Swain. Nicely done, Paul.
I think that the interesting thing was that episode 2 was the last one that we did that was shot. And when I started working with Rian on that episode, because Rian did such a brilliant job directing that, he and I talked a lot about how episode 1 does sort of set up the structure, but episode 2 really teaches the audience how to watch the show. And the key was, okay, how do we put these little nuggets into the first act that then are revealed in the second act so that people have fun going, oh, okay, now I need to watch the show really carefully to see where Charlie might have been. Like in that episode 2, the night shift, she's having drinks with Marge in the diner, and then we just see Jed wheeling the body behind her. And some people catch it and some people don't, but it's sort of telling people, okay, pay attention, because there's all these like little clues that are being set up.
You guys caught me off guard a little bit in discussing the fact that the first episode you three saw without Bob was episode 9. How was the show shot, and how was it determined who would, I mean, I get Bob doing the pilot. That makes total sense. But how was it determined who would cut what? Because you got Paul doing 3 consecutives in the middle, and, you know, Bob's there for up 2.
Yeah, IMDb's got it wrong again.
Jeez.
Yeah, I don't know, Matt. Did you do your research on this?
Have you actually watched the show?
This is Poker Face, right?
Yeah. It's The Handmaid's Tale. What are you talking about?
Peacock did a great job advertising it so you understand what the show is, but did you watch it?
I've heard good things. When we're done, I'll get to watching it, probably at least 2 episodes.
I cut episode 1 and 9, for example.
Yes.
And I cut 6 and 7.
6 and 7.
And I cut 2, 4, and 10. That is, with one exception, almost exactly what I have on my notes. So.
Oh, that's good.
Perfect.
And Shahid, he just showed up once in a while.
I kind of rooted really hard. I did my best to try to just interfere with all of the editing. That was kind of.
He would just come in my room and say, cut there.
Yes.
But to that question, Matt, I mean, just in terms of, who got what episode, for me personally, I was just told this is what you're going to do. There was a slight change. I was going to cut, what was the episode number, Glenn, with the band?
It's episode 4, and that's Rest in Metal.
Yeah, so I was slated to cut that, and I was pretty excited. I've got a history of being a rock drummer in a band, in the UK. And I was like, oh, this is great. This is my life on screen. This is awesome. And then, as it got nearer the time, they said, oh, no, we're switching you around. You're going to do this one and this one, which is fine. I didn't really care because I knew they were all going to be fantastic.
Well, this is your time to lament, Paul. You can, this is your time to kind of get all of those grievances out if you have any.
God damn it, I wanted that episode. No, it's fine. Glenn did a great job. And anyway, I kind of lived through it anyway, didn't I, Glenn? Because your edit suite was right next to mine, and I heard that music day after day.
Sucker Punch, many, many times.
Hour after hour at volume 11.
I think I got an idea for an episode for season 2. It's about a jealous picture editor.
Who gets murdered, though, Bob?
I think you're in the first act, Paul.
No, I wasn't jealous. I was really happy with my episodes. It's like I said, they were all brilliant. They all had their unique tone and feeling about it. So I really didn't care. It's fine.
Wait, so there's a jealous picture editor, but an even more jealous assistant editor. So the picture editor gets murdered, so the assistant editor can take his chair.
Oh, yeah. See?
Or her chair.
Yep. It's the story as old as time.
Moving on. We talked about the swings and the tone of the show. In addition to the swings and the tone are swings in imagery and music. You talk to editors a lot about, it was important that we established a visual language for the film or for the series. In the case of Poker Face, you kind of throw that out each episode, like with slow-mos and picture-in-pictures, and you even have stop motion in one episode, which I really enjoyed. So it just seems like for each episode, you don't really have to follow closely a model of, well, this is how we did slow-mos in the last episode. Kind of free to do whatever you want.
I just want to mention one thing regarding that, because there is one item that stays the same show after show, and that is the music that plays Charlie's entrance into the episode. I'm not going to say everything else is different by design, but that particular element is by design, and it gives a sense of, to me anyway, and its intention is to give a sense of comfort, because now we've set the table, and now here comes our heroine. And she's introed in the same way in every show in that regard.
So that element is consistent. And then in that act 1, it's just sort of all bets are off.
Yeah, I mean, when I had the first conversations with Ryan and Rom about the show, one of the things that they emphasized that I'm just highlighting that the guys have already talked about is that each episode, had its own specific style. And it's not intentionally driven in one direction or another, but really just what the story and characters require, which I think is pretty interesting, because you're not beholden to a particular show identity, but you do have things that anchor it, like Charlie Cale, for example, and the general nature of the structure, which is, the murder happens, we know who it is, Charlie doesn't, she appears, she figures it out.
The process of working with the composers, as Bob just said, that one consistent thing, the banjo theme for Charlie, which sort of brings you back, lets you know, like, okay, we're with Charlie again, now we're into the meat of the show. There's that part of it. But tell me about the process of doing any kind of temp scoring and working with, again, I'm going off IMDb, but you have Judson Crane and Nathan Johnson as composers. Who knows what episodes they did? I'm going to give up on that. But just tell me about working with them and the temp score and scoring process for Poker Face.
Yeah, great question, Matt.
Finally.
This is the problem when you bring people on your show that you've known for a long time. They're going to harass you a little bit.
I won't make that mistake again.
Well, I had a very fortunate and awesome opportunity as an editor to be able to work on episode 8, which was the episode that Natasha starred in and wrote, but not only starred and wrote, but also directed. And it's kind of an epic opportunity for an editor to be able to be with someone in the room that has worn so many hats. And kind of going back to what Bob was saying earlier is, in my opinion, one of the great parts about the show is that we have this similar format that we do every show, but there's always surprises that are in there. And one of the biggest surprises, kind of comes from how do you craft that first act. And in episode 8, we had a murder that I think happens probably within like the first 20, 25 seconds of the show. The murder happens almost immediately, which at the time we thought was a suicide, but then find out it's kind of a murder. But with that being said, that first act was probably my favorite. It just kind of really worked together very beautifully. And that all kind of really got glued together when we figured out the score for that. And we went a lot of different directions with it, but we ultimately ended up pimping it with some Bernard Herrmann cubes that we took, one of the greatest composers of all time. So that put a very difficult task in front of our two composers, Nathan and Judd, because how do you match this, one of the greatest composers of all time? And that was the one episode in which we had all made the choice to actually score it with an orchestra. And the work that they did in the score of that episode, it's so beautiful. And the first act kind of just has like this flow, and it just starts from the top, from just the writing and the work the vision that Natasha had and Ryan. And that's just one of the, I think, powerful things about the show is just the level of craftsmanship and care and detail that goes into the show from all the departments, top to bottom. But I remember being on the mix stage and for the first time hearing that beautiful score that Nathan and Judd put together. I'll say Judd and Nathan because I think I ended up having a conversation with Nathan. I think Judd really took the mantle on that one, and it was quite impressive what they had put together. So, for those of you who haven't seen the show, watch it. And those who watched episode 8, pay attention to how masterful the score is on that.
It's interesting because very early on, Bob gave us some very good advice, which was try not to put in temp score unless you really have to. And that was because Ryan, I think, wants to see it without music. And he specifically with this show wanted to see how many scenes could play without music. The music in a lot of the episodes is fairly sparse because he really wanted to have the actors and the pace and everything work without having music as a crutch. And so the main thing that we had was this banjo cue, and the rest of it was either source cues or not having temp music. And then Ryan would come in and he would then be able to tell us where he felt music was necessary and where it wasn't, which I think was different than a lot of shows that we work on, especially as editors, because we're always told, oh, you need to put in lots of temp music. And this was the opposite of that.
Well, Bob, during the non-research that I clearly didn't do for this interview, one of the things I didn't read was that for Charlie's theme, a lot of times, or sometimes it was played softer, sometimes more upbeat, sometimes it was slowed down, that you were able to play with that theme a little bit. Is that something that you would do an editorial with stems, or is that something largely left to the sound team?
On the episodes that I did, 1 and 9, which, by the way, I mean, the very first episode photographed was episode 9. And by the way, even episode 9 wasn't completely photographed. There were still a couple of things that were left for a location that came later. And then episode 1, which is the pilot, the thing that gets us going. That was next, but that show was absolutely not completed, and not until the very, very end of production was the rest of the photography. So the reason I'm mentioning this is that these were the first 2 episodes up, and the reason that you were asking earlier, well, how did it all get divided and set up? And I did the first 2 episodes that were photographed because they were the first 2 episodes that Rian did. So we developed a lot of the ideas that we thought would perhaps work throughout the other episodes, and this music that brought Charlie in was something that was explored a bit. In the 2 episodes that I did, it was exactly the same because it was the exact same piece of music. The manipulations that happened later were, the same sort of thing that we were talking about, where each of the episodes were kind of their own thing and could be manipulated in ways to suit the sort of little mini movie, television episode that the series is.
So in addition to the score, needle drops obviously very important. And in the case of Poker Face, they don't just support the story stylistically, they speak to it. The lyrics of the songs are very important. So I'd like to know about that process. Some of these episodes have a lot of needle drops, but whether there's a lot or a few, they're all very important to the overall story. So Paul, maybe you want to tell me about working, was it a playlist from Rian? Were those things really already hammered out? Was it working with music supervisor Thomas Golubich, who's certainly got a tremendous track record of shows that he's worked on? Tell me about the needle drop process for Poker Face.
Yeah, and look, first and foremost, Thomas is fantastic. I worked with him on another show called Guilty Party, and he was his team. They just always come back to you with some incredible tracks to use, very unique tracks. But in terms of needle drops, my episodes didn't really have that many. I think from memory, the only 2 I had was for the end credits, and those were very specific from Rian. Rian would go, I want this track in this, and I want this track in this. So he's got an incredible knowledge of music as well as film. So he would come up with some incredible suggestions. We'd then kick it to Thomas. He'd do the clearance and everything, and we'd just put them in. My Exit Stage Death episode was predominantly classical tracks, a lot of classical music all the way through. But in terms of any contemporary needle drops, I didn't have too many. So maybe I can throw that to one of the other guys that had a few more tracks.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Rian is not only is he extremely well-knowledged in film, he's also well-knowledged in music. And he's got such eclectic taste. And he would come in and he'd say, let's put this piece of music here. Let's see how that works. And most of the time it fit perfectly. And when it did, there were times that we couldn't get the rights to it. And so then Thomas was instrumental in giving us many different variations of other pieces of music that we could afford. And so he would give us a bunch of different things, and we'd try different things that were in similar tones. And that's what Thomas was fantastic with. And I believe that the episode that probably has the most needle drops is one that Shahid edited about the old people's home. And the music in that's just brilliant. Do you want to talk about that, Shahid?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm going to have a lot more to offer. It was exactly what Glenn was saying. Rian's knowledge in music is so vast and eclectic, and we had a lot of music in again the first act of the show, especially probably back the first 30 minutes of the show had a ton of needle drops. But then the music tapers off as we get more into the murder and the dramatic elements of that episode. And we're talking about the retirement, the episode 5. The retirement home episode with Judith Light and Peta.
Probably one of the wackiest out there episodes of a show that's pretty wacky and out there. So congratulations.
Thank you. Yes, I loved how wacky that episode was. And we used this kind of jazzy cue from this Ethiopian band earlier in the show during the murder. And I remember when Rian came into the editing room and he was like, try this. And, and one of the great things about working with Rian, for being someone who has spent a lot of time in television, you tend to, as all television editors know, music kind of becomes an important part of the process these days. There's so much you can do. So you really have to kind of temp a lot of stuff that you do. But Rian watches our cuts dry for the first pass, and that was quite a treat to work with a filmmaker who is just going to work on the picture. And so we had the picture set in the first half of the first act of the show. And Ryan comes in with this cue from this Ethiopian band with this jazzy vibe to it. And it was crazy how the cue lays into the picture perfectly. We actually didn't do any edits to the music at all. It just ended up and I remember I slap it in there. We play the murder sequence, and Ryan and I were just kind of screaming throughout this whole sequence because the cues were like hitting moments in picture almost perfectly. And I would love to say that we had like handcrafted it and cut it perfectly and shaped the picture, but it was so strange how this song just was almost like perfect. And we turned and looked at each other, and I remember singing that moment so perfectly where we just were like, holy smokes, that's it. And it was an easy suggestion, and that was the song, and that was the one that ended up airing.
Glenn, you very casually mentioned Ryan's vast film knowledge, and one of the many things I enjoyed about the series, and this is not a question, it's an observation, so you can choose to react to it or not. References to The Conversation happened twice in the series. He's talking about Gene Hackman. I don't think they called out The Conversation, but it was clearly a reference to The Conversation. Just your thoughts on things like that being just sort of coloring the episodes, coloring the show, having that kind of like, probably most of the audience is not going to get that you're talking about this film, The Conversation, but you did it anyway, and it makes it, that much more fun.
You're referring to episode 10, the finale, where Charlie is playing back some of the recording that Sterling had done. And yes, I think that Ryan wrote that episode, and not only is he an amazing filmmaker, but he also is just a fantastic guy. And it's just such a joy working with him in the room. He really puts you at ease, as Paul mentioned earlier. And as far as those little tidbits, I think that Ryan likes to make reference to what he enjoys. And I don't think that there was any specific conversation with, let's make this reference to The Conversation. It was more like, if people get it, great. If people don't get it, that's fine. But it's more like, there's ways to watch the show. You can watch it on many different levels. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I think the show has caught such a zeitgeist, is that people really can just watch it as a murder mystery. They can watch it as a comedy. They can watch it as something that has so many different levels to it. And I think that that's just something that Ryan lended to the show, and then the incredible crew just ran with it, and everyone just added more and more layers. And it's just one of those shows that you could really dive deep into.
I know you're not the writers of the show, but you're absolutely the rewriters. And in that role as editors, you want to have as many options available to you as possible. The main character, Charlie, has this kind of like a superpower that she can always tell if someone is lying, which is, certainly a pretty neat skill set to have if you're in the business of solving murders. So her abilities as like a human lie detector are definitely a plus. Knowing that, as you're in essence rewriting the show in editorial, do you have to be careful of that story logic? Like, make sure that, wait, what they just said there, she should be able to detect if that's a lie, or something like that. It just seems like another level of mental overhead in terms of this character always knows when somebody is lying. So even if it's a casual lie, she would know. Nobody wants that.
I will jump in on that one, Matt.
God bless you, Shahid.
and I respect what you're saying, because I always feel like editing, the cut is the final version of every script. But we have to give a lot of credit and a lot of props to this very talented, very powerful writing team that we had for these shows, because it was something that they did on every single episode. Since this is a kind of an episode you could watch out of order if you like, it's kind of one of the, I think, freedoms of the episode. These days, everything's so serialized that sometimes I think you get, you don't want to have that like 10 episode commitment. You just don't have the time. I think if you're like us, your editors don't have a lot of time. So I think one of the things that's so refreshing about Poker Face is you can watch every episode. And one of the brilliant things that the writers do is there's always a scene where Charlie tells us in some kind of way, I'm a human lie detector. I can detect the lies. Let's not even get into it, but I just kind of know when people are telling the truth or lies. So we always establish that in some kind of way in every episode, so we can kind of continue to keep that through line, even if you just jump into episode 6 for the very first time and haven't seen any of the other ones. So I want to give a little bit of credit on, I know this is an editing podcast, but I'm going to give a little bit of credit to the writers. And we got to give credit to the writers for that one.
To what Shahid was saying, the writing was fantastic in this. And then it was about making sure that the audience was never ahead of Charlie, but also never got lost. And so that was the key with calibrating the edit, is to make sure that you were just slightly ahead of the audience, but giving the audience all the different information that they needed so that they could sort of watch it. And it's not like a murder mystery where we don't know who did it. The joy in watching the show is, how is Charlie going to figure this out? So it was always about how much information to release so that she didn't figure it out. But that was really well calibrated in the writing. And one thing that I would say that Rian is brilliant at is knowing how much information to provide and how much information not to provide, so that the audience is always leaning forward and really going on this ride with the characters.
Yeah, absolutely. What I noticed that he's great at is, if there's anything on screen that isn't driving the story, cut it. Like, yeah, every time it's like, is it going to story? Is it going to go to story? We're always propelling that story. And, perhaps we put a few shots in, for a look or whatever. And he's like, is that helping the story? And we're like, no, but it kind of shows this. It's nice. And he's like, cut it. It's not pushing the story. And I think, when you get to the end of the episode, you're like, yeah, wow, every shot, everything we see on screen is there for a purpose.
So before we wrap this up, I think I'd be remiss in not asking Bob. I believe this is the first TV series. I don't know if you've done a lot of TV in your past. Again, I guess I should do more research. But it's the first TV series you've done with Rian. How does it compare doing TV with Rian as opposed to doing a feature film with him? Process-wise, anyway.
I think it was exactly the same because, it's a story in a different format. All the same considerations exist. The character work, telling a good, clear, focused story. I guess probably the only difference is it's faster and we have less money. So that impacts the process a little bit. Some things that might get you might do something else on a feature because you have more time and money. But I think it's a minor consideration, frankly. It was interesting to me because being involved in the show was a bit of a complexity because we were making a feature film at the time. And I remember, as Rian and I were working on episode 9, I said to him, I think this is one of my favorite things that I've ever been involved in. And it surprised me to say that, not because I didn't think the script was great and that it was something that we were, that we were doing in addition to this other big thing. And I really enjoyed that because I think the show's, really terrific. Personally, I find it terrific because, again, because of timing for me, what I had seen when we were done, and because we weren't all together, was I had seen my 2 episodes, 1 and 9. I'd read the script for 10, and I'd seen episodes 3 and 4, and that was the entirety of my understanding of the series. So when the show was broadcast or streamed, I watched the show like a viewer because I only had half the information. It was a very unique position for me that I'd never had before, and I think because obviously, like with a feature, I mean, I'm the only one involved in it from an editorial standpoint, and I've seen it over and over and over and over again. And so watching something like that is, I mean, it's a removed experience that's not like a normal audience member. But I really watch the series as is like anyone else tuning into to Peacock, and I just found it delightful and awesome. And funny. And I thought one of the things that's particularly interesting about it to me is that the format of the show is on one hand predictable, but on the other hand, it provides great comfort. Like television used to be a ritualistic experience. You'd sit down in front, you had your 3 hours a day of prime time, 5 days a week, and you might watch whatever you watch. And there, these sort of characters come into your home and you enjoy them in this very comfortable way. And I think that this show does this, but I think even goes beyond that because it's modern, and because it's streamed, it isn't held back by some of the restrictions of network television. And I just think it's great and really charming and funny and wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely all those things. And in talking to you guys today, it's clear how much respect and admiration you have for one another. It comes through in the final product. I encourage everybody to watch the series. I guess the last thing I'll ask you, because of Charlie's unique gift of being able to tell anytime someone's lying to her, if you could always tell when someone was lying to you, do you think that would help you as an editor or hurt?
I think it might be quite painful in this industry to know if you always knew when people are lying. I think sometimes you need a little comfortable lie in this business.
A convenient lie.
Yeah, I think that when you have a screening and you have audience members watch it and then afterwards talking to them, you kind of know when they're telling you, yeah, it was good. Yeah, you sort of know when they're lying and things like that. But, I think one of the wonderful things about this show is that Charlie, even though she has this superpower, is a big hot mess. And that's just something wonderful, is that it's not like she's a perfect character. She's wonderful. She's warm. She's funny. But her life is a mess. And yet she has this superpower. And that's just a really interesting character to play a whole series off of.
I've got my lovely wife, Linda, as my barometer. And sometimes I wish she would lie a bit more, because every show that I've ever shown her, she's like, oh, yeah, that's okay. I'm like, can you tell me it's brilliant? And she's like, yeah, it's fine. It's nice. But luckily, she did actually enjoy Poker Face. This is one of the shows that I've done, and I'm happy to say that she really enjoyed. So that's a tick.
Good for you, Paul.
I'd say that's the biggest win of all, if you ask me.
Yeah. I
think I would say, and I don't say this in any way out of arrogance, but I've done this so long that I really think I know when they're lying. There are tells in the phoniness of our business, which I mean, I enjoy. I love show business so much, and the characters that inhabit it, and their ability to pretend that you can't see what they really think. It's kind of fun.
Charlie Cale is actually based on Bob.
I can assure you that's not true.
Was Charlie Cale based on Bob? Who knows? But it is no lie when I tell you this is a really great show. Don't listen to what those guys said. I watched every minute of this series and enjoyed every one of them. And I think you will too, so check out Poker Face on Peacock. Thank you as always to Bob, Glenn, Shahid, and Paul for making the time to talk to us today. I hope you enjoyed it. Say, are you a student who dreams of a career making movies or television shows? Or perhaps a media educator who strives to empower your students to achieve their dreams? You are? Well, here's some great news for you. Avid is now offering higher ed institutions that offer undergraduate and graduate degree programs the opportunity to provide free Media Composer software to any student who wants it. Yes, the new Media Composer for Students program enables your school to provide the same tools and technology used on hit shows like Poker Face to all of your students at no cost. And you can find out more by clicking the link in today's podcast show notes. Well, that will do it for another edition of our little adventure in post-production. Please don't be a stranger and come back for another one, and maybe another after that. And if you like what you hear, please subscribe to the podcast, and maybe even spread the word. Tell a friend, tell a loved one, tell the kid at Starbucks who keeps making your drink wrong, tell everyone. Who wouldn't want to know more about the awesome editors out there making the movies and TV shows we all love? I can't imagine. All right, bye for now. Until the next one, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.